So somebody pinched me. Somehow I got the lucky duty of getting out to come out to the Scab Creek today and watch them feed the elk. I'm here with Nicole and Ryan. Nicole, how long have you been doing this?
Since 2005.
Okay, and how did you get your start?
You know, Gary had an ad out, and it was a perfect job. I'm out here with the elk. I love making sure they're doing good every day. I'm outside every day. You can't beat them.
And as an outdoors woman, this is important to you to be sure that the herd health is in good shape.
It is. Making sure the elk are healthy is so important, and this is the best way to be part of that.
John Lund is a wildlife supervisor here in the Pinedale District for the Wyoming Game and Fish. He's participating on an internal working group that's addressing some of the issues that face the state feed grounds, and he's agreed to answer a few questions for us. Well, John, can you give us an overview about the history of the elk feed grounds?
So the elk feed ground program in Wyoming actually started over 100 years ago in the Jackson area, going back as far as the early 1900s. At the time, there were several severe winters in that Jackson area that got the attention of the local residents there, with large-scale starvation events that took place. And as a result, several individuals began kind of informal elk feeding operations on their own. And then in about 1912, the federal government became involved. So in addition to the National Elk Refuge, the state became officially involved in the program in about 1912 when they created 3 feed grounds, 3 Wyoming Game and Fish Department feed grounds. One of those was in the Upper Green area, another in the Grovant, and then one in the Star Valley in the Alpine area. So the department recently has started what we're calling a elk feed ground collaborative process. That it'll be an ongoing process for the next couple years probably, where we are gathering public input through various stakeholders. And so phase 1 of this process just finished up. And the purpose of that process was primarily an educational phase for the public and various stakeholders. And we spent quite a bit of time on general education on the history of elk feed grounds, some of the challenges that we deal with on these feed grounds on a regular basis, as well as the complexities and disease issues and all of the various issues that go along with elk feed grounds. We presented that educational material to the public. We'll be starting phase 2, what we're calling phase 2 here in the very near future, where we'll be bringing in stakeholders from around the state, and primarily, especially people that are impacted by elk feed grounds in various ways. And we'll be working with them to collect input, to get their thoughts and ideas, as well as discuss all the complexities that go with them. And the long-term plan is that we'll develop a long-term management plan for these elk feed grounds. This is not a plan to phase out elk feed grounds.
Josh Coursey is the co-founder and CEO of the Mule Fanatic Foundation, whose passion runs deep. Their mission is to protect healthy mule deer populations through science-based decisions. I asked Josh to give some insight on the potential impact that elk could have on these western winter ranges.
I'm Joshua Coursey, president of the Mule Fanatic Foundation. We established ourselves in 2012. We're based out of Green River, Wyoming, 17 chapters currently. We're a mule deer conservation group with mule deer populations. You know, depending on who you listen to, kind of the general consensus is that mule deer populations over the last 2 decades have declined about 40% across the West. When you look at western Wyoming in particular, to think that you could potentially have that competition from elk on what has already been a pretty good blow to the chin for mule deer populations on a specifically crucial winter range, it would absolutely be catastrophic for the populations of deer that exist on those landscapes today. And where we're at right now today, just as you can see with the north end of the mesa, that area right there behind us, where you see this private property and this beautiful valley below, these elk would be in an area where right now it's one of the few strongholds that mule deer are hanging on to. Clearly the impacts of competition, elk are resilient and are going to find a way to make home. Unfortunately, and we've seen through research, deer take it on the chin when elk have to take over a landscape deer continue to just have another layer that they have to deal with in their sustainability.
Next, we share with you insights from a fourth-generation rancher and Wyomingite, Albert Summers. He's currently serving as the majority House floor leader in the Wyoming legislature. Here's why Albert took an interest in preserving these Wyoming state-run elk feed grounds and why he chose to sponsor House Bill 101.
So my name is Albert Summers, and I am a rancher and legislator from western Wyoming and Sublette County. My family are fourth generation on both sides of my family, and probably fourth generation hunters in Wyoming on both sides of my family. So we're here today to talk about, I'm the majority floor leader in the Wyoming House of Representatives, and as a representative from House District 20 in Sublette County, I'm here to talk about elk feed grounds and the importance of elk feed grounds to hunters in my area and to ranchers in my area. Yeah, so the bill that deals with elk feed grounds is House Bill 101, and it has passed the House of Representatives and it's now in the Senate. Really, the genesis comes from this spring when the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, they started having meetings kind of around western Wyoming to talk about feed grounds and the challenges with feed grounds, but also the benefits of feed grounds. And so it got me to thinking about the whole hierarchy of how we make decisions, for example, if an elk feed ground were to close. And so elk feed grounds are critically important in western and northwestern Wyoming. And the reason for that is the old migration routes for elk to the lower country, the deserts, have been broken 100 years ago. And much of the reason they were broken is largely because of depredation on haystacks, so elk eat hay, and so it was a conflict with livestock, but also because those migration routes started to break, it was because elk were dying. And they died in the Upper Green, they died in Jackson, and they died in different places. And the idea was, how do we save this precious resource, these elk, and not have this conflict with livestock? And then as time has went on, we brought in another issue, which was brucellosis. And so brucellosis became endemic in the elk herd in western and northwestern Wyoming, both in feed ground elk and non-feed ground elk. But what feed grounds do in the winter is keep elk a little higher and away from cattle during that really important time when brucellosis can be transmitted, and that's usually March to June, depending on when an abortion might occur. And my fear is if by eliminating elk feed ground, out of the fear of chronic wasting disease, that we're going to lose the very resource we're trying to protect. And that would be a shame for hunters, for outfitters who make a business, for mom and pop hotels in western and northwestern Wyoming. You can go down the line of the impacts we would have if we decimated those elk herds. Not to mention how many livestock producers might go out of business because of brucellosis. So that's why I brought House Bill 101, and it's not to make it illegal to close an elk feed ground. It's just saying, let's put a process in place. I don't want to strip powers from the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. I just want to ensure that there's a thoughtful process moving forward. And so if the commission, through the good hard science, feels like we need to close this feed ground, then what this bill would do would go, okay, you need to make that recommendation to the governor, and you also need to make that recommendation to the Wyoming Livestock Board. And their role in this is they are the state agency that oversees livestock health. And the reason brucellosis is an important disease is because it's zoonotic. That means it's transmissible between animals and humans. And so it is a disease that has to be watched. And so Game and Fish Commission makes a recommendation to the governor and to the Livestock Board. The Wyoming Livestock Board makes a recommendation to the governor. Those two entities create basically hold a public meeting and get comment, and they have to hold it in the area where where the challenge is, where the elk feed ground might be closed. And then the governor makes the decision. So it elevates that decision from the commission to the guy that appoints the commission. So basically it goes to the top executive. So we have the issue of the effect on the elk herds, and we have the issue of the effect on cattle herds that may happen if we close feed grounds. But one thing we didn't talk about is my ranch actually sits in the middle of mule deer winter range, some of the best mule deer winter range in the state. But what's interesting to understand is the history behind this. And that is, my dad saw his first mule deer. Remember, my dad now was born in 1915. He saw his first mule deer when he was 16 years old in 1931. So my dad we live in the middle of mule deer winter range, lots and lots of deer around us right now. My dad never sees a deer until 1931. And when you look at the horn pile at the old ranch house, it's all elk horns. You look at the horn pile on the ranch house built in the 1950s, and it's all mule deer. And people don't understand these conversions on the landscape and the interaction between species. And if we release all these elk herds on mule deer winter range, what is going to be the effect on that, on a population that in fact is beginning to struggle? And so I worry about that as much as I worry about anything else.
What happens to the elk there on the landscape if the management scheme changed and, say, the feed grounds went away?
If feed grounds went away at the flip of a switch, the impacts would be significant, without a doubt. Not only starvation events, but we would also see some major conflict with private property and cattle operations and whatnot that would absolutely have to be addressed. And so that would not be a good outcome.
Okay.
I don't believe that's what anybody wants. I know there's different sides to the whole feed ground process and the concept of feed grounds, and there's very polarized publics. I don't believe anybody wants to see massive starvation events, regardless of where they stand on feed grounds. If elk were forced to rely on what we called some of the traditional native winter ranges, they would be competing with other big game animals such as mule deer, in some cases moose and pronghorn as well. Those habitats are already in pretty rough shape. Significant numbers of additional elk would be detrimental to those wintering animals.
Okay.
Yeah, the Muley Fanatic Foundation commissioned a PhD project with the University of Wyoming in partnership with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department in 2015. It was a very extensive study and a very costly study that really looked at the impacts and competition between the two species of deer and elk. The project was called Deer Elk Ecology Research, and the idea behind this project was to flesh out and really try to understand how these two species coexist on the landscape. And this was an exhaustive study by all means. After 5 years of number crunching and looking at this project, and that data analysis is still going on today, it is clear that deer come out on the short end when you have competition on the landscape between deer and elk being the more dominant species every time. Where we're at today, just north of the mesa, just south of Pinedale, Wyoming, this is critical winter range for mule deer. There's approximately 12 feed grounds within this area that if those feed grounds potentially were closed, the impact could be devastating for mule deer that depend on this critical winter range today.
I'm Cy Gilliland, the current president of the Wyoming Outfitter and Guides Association. Thank you for taking an interest in the incredibly complex issue of winter feeding of western Wyoming elk. We hope you found this information informative. I'm pleased to update you that the Elk Feed Ground Closing Bill, HB 101, was passed and was signed into law on April 5th, 2021 by Governor Gordon. Passing this critical legislation will go far in protecting these treasured elk herds. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department is preparing to enter Phase 2 of the Elk Feed Ground public engagement process. As sports persons, this is your opportunity to get involved. Please take the time to attend the public meetings and comment. The outfitting industry, along with Safari Club International, continue the legal battles to protect Wyoming's 22 state-run feed grounds and the National Elk Refuge. We can use your financial help. Please consider a donation. Any amount will help.